Welcome to the Just Ask podcast, exploring the secrets to a healthier, happier, and more connected marriage. I'm Becky Bridgham.
And I'm Jim Bridgham.
And we're your hosts on this journey.
Whether you're navigating the joys and challenges of married life, raising a family, or striving for better health and fitness, you've come to the right place. We're here to provide you with the guidance, insights, and tips you need to create a thriving partnership.
But what makes our podcast unique? Well, we're not just here to share our own experiences, we're here to answer your burning questions. Each week, we'll dive into the topics that matter most to you.
So remember, Just Ask isn't just a name, it's also an invitation. We want to hear from you. If you've got a question about relationships, family dynamics, or how to stay fit together as a couple, don't hesitate to reach out. Drop us a line through the website or social media, and we might even feature your question in an upcoming episode.
And to make sure you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe. We'll be coming to you every week, and trust us, you won't want to miss a single episode.
So we'll dive in. Grab your favorite beverage, cozy up, and let's look into the wonderful world of marriage, family, and fitness, and we'll do it together. You've got questions, we've got answers. This is Just Ask, the podcast for couples seeking happiness, health, and harmony. Let's go. Hey everybody, and welcome to this week's Just Ask podcast. I'm Jim.
And I'm Becky.
And this week we're looking at creating and maximizing a family budget. And budgets aren't exactly like, again, a sexy topic. It's like 2 weeks in a row where I get to say that. But what you'll find is that they're important. They're important for everything you want to do that's fun in your life. And so this is a very practical podcast. We're going to kind of get a little bit in the weeds, and it's designed to give you the life you want. So we're not doing this so that you live on nothing and just, hang out with lint in your basement and don't go anywhere. The goal of this is to give you the means with the funds you have to get to do the fun things you want to do. Okay. So I want to set the stage a little bit with this, is that having a budget isn't like framed like a prison or maybe
it's not a punishment.
Yeah, I try to think of a good word. What's it, like corral, right? So I should know this now that I'm around horses and stuff, I guess, now that we live out by horses. We're not here to keep you locked down. But we do know that a budget will help you to live the life you want. Now, what are some of those common challenges? Well, we all have streaming services. And what you'll find is when we started streaming, we'd get one thing. We're like, oh man, Netflix, it's only this much per month. And then you add on 10 other streaming services. And where initially we're like, wow, we're getting such value, we're paying a fraction of cable. Now some people are paying maybe even double, or in some cases triple in those subscription services. That's a common challenge. Other challenges are dealing with food budgets. The current economy is not spectacular. So what can we do to navigate those? So let's jump in with some basics.
Awesome. So the first thing is, let's talk about in general, what is a budget? And Jim explained that it's not a punishment. It's not a prison. It's a tool that you can use for you and your family. Simply put, it's the income you have coming in, it's the expenses you have going out, and attaching those to specific goals. So for example, one of the things with just creating a budget is you need to know your data. A lot of times, especially if for people that maybe make a decent wage, they're not really struggling, they don't really have to pay attention that closely, they're not paying attention. So all of a sudden, oh my gosh, I'm making $200,000 and I don't have any savings. Whereas they have someone else who's making $50,000 who is paying attention. They have savings, they have an emergency fund, they have no credit card debt because they're paying attention. So just because you make a lot of money doesn't mean that you don't need a budget. Everyone should be on a budget, just like we feel like everyone should be exercising. It's just a part of a healthy lifestyle. And so knowing your data is the first thing. What income do you have coming in? If you have one job, your spouse has one job, it's pretty simple. This is what we have coming in. But it might be other things. You might be selling, something on Etsy, or you might have a side hustle, or you might be babysitting on the weekend for a neighbor, and you might have other areas of income that you're unaware of until you actually put it down on paper. So what's coming in, and then the harder part is what's going out. And that sometimes can feel very cumbersome. In the beginning, Jim's going to talk about how he designed our budget recently with more details, but there is a lot of moving pieces. I mean, we spend a lot of money. Every little transaction is something to be paid attention to, but doing the work in the beginning, just like, I always talk about tracking your food, getting to know the data of what you're eating helps you reach your physical goals. Getting to know the data of what you're spending helps you meet your financial goals. And so it's just part of the process, and it does get easier. And going back to the goals, like Jim said, this is what allows you to have the freedom to do the things you want without stress. So one of the taglines that Dave Ramsey, we learned to budget through Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University about 20 years ago. We've been using his principles since then. We've been debt free, minus our house. That's our last big goal. But we have had no car payments, no credit card payments, no debt, no student loans for 15 years. I mean, we just don't even understand what it is like to have debt. And what I do know is that it's stressful. When we first got married, we had no money. I had student loans, Jim had student loans, we had credit cards, we had all these things. We found this course that we took, and it literally changed the trajectory of our lives. And so our goal with teaching you these things is to help you do that. And so you need to know what your goals are. One of the taglines, coming back to that Dave Ramsey will always say is you want to have a vacation that doesn't follow you home on a credit card. So it's very different when you save for a vacation all year, you go, you enjoy it, you have the money in your account to spend on it, and you come home and it's no big deal. There's a different feeling of when you put a cruise or a vacation on a credit card and then you come home and you're paying for it for the next 12, 18 months. That's a different stressor. It's a different vibe. And so what we want to do is help you set things up on the front end so that you can enjoy the life that you really want.
Yeah. And when Becky says we don't really understand it, 'cause, we haven't had debt for a while, what got us to get on this plan was just an overwhelming amount of debt to income ratio. It was super bad. And at one point when we got out and I went to seminary, we were literally at a food bank, like getting bread, like day old expired bread, thanks to Kroger donating it to students. So we were in like a rough spot. And so because of that budget, it's been able to change our approach and to help us to live like no one else. Now, a thing to note about that too is you might be thinking, well, I make a lot of money. I can spend my way around it. Becky alluded to this, but you can't spend your way around it. I'd argue if you have less than maybe 10 million a year in income, you can still spend that much money. Now, I don't have 10 million in income. If you're listening to this, chances are you don't either. And if you think, oh, I'm making 400,000, I've worked with people one-on-one where we've looked at their income and they're making well over 300K a year. And this is like a decade ago. So that's probably like 400K now, right? And they could not afford their monthly bills with that. It's crazy. So what do we do? Well, wherever you are, if I'm not making you feel bad about where you're at, it's okay. We just have to acknowledge where you are. So we're going to start with looking at your spending habits. So take all of your spending. If you have multiple credit cards, debit cards, cash, whatever it may be, I want you to document every single purchase. Now, how do you do it? Excel. You don't need a program to do it. Now, of course, that's great. There are apps and all kinds of things. To me, they're more complicated to set up than an Excel spreadsheet. Create an Excel spreadsheet. You get milk delivered at home. Let's say that's common in Colorado. If you're not here, like Royal Crest delivers and stuff. Write it down. It is delicious. And we don't make any money for that endorsement. But write down your bill from them. If you're going to McDonald's, I want you to write it down on purpose. Every time you go, every order from Amazon, write it down. Everything. And what we're doing with this is to get real granular of what is actually going on. The second thing is when you're doing that, look for potential savings. We started looking at stuff and I'm like, what the heck is this? Just different things that came up. We're not spendy people, but over time you get let's say a subscription to a streaming service for one of my kids. And at first it's, 6 months free or whatever. And then over time you're like, oh my gosh, we have 10 streaming services. And what I did was I went through and just cut some of the ones that they had begged me for, and they had no clue, and they still don't have a clue because they haven't even asked about it. Or one had been using a gaming streaming service, Xbox Live. It costs so much per year to do that. And I just cut it to see what happened. And there's been no feedback. And I'm like, here we go. Right. So that's where you're looking for savings. Now you might say that's not much, but I found tons of money in realized savings by just making those little cuts. Okay, the next thing is look at your priorities. So let's say your priorities are to travel or to see concerts. I love going to concerts. Make a concert line. So what does that mean? In your Excel spreadsheet, let's say you go to 6 concerts a year and you spend a total of, let's just say $2,000. It may or may not be that high, but let's say $2,000. You take that $2,000 and divide it over 12, and you say each month, this is the amount of money that I need to save for those concerts. Same thing with travel. Let's say you're a big person that goes to Disney every year, or you go on a big trip. That trip costs, let's say, $3,600. You put $300 a month, because 36 by 12, and you say that's where that's going. So you're take your priorities and you put them on paper. I'd like to talk about this in a different way. I have a task list that can get out of control. if it goes on my task list, it goes on my calendar. So if I have a task to do X, X is blocked on the calendar. So because if I just have a task list and no time to do it, it's just an idea, like it's a figment of my imagination. If you have like a plan, your priority is to go to Nebraska every summer for whatever, see a football game or something. Well, if you do that and you don't have money allocated for it, it's just a pipe dream. Or worse, let's say you get a credit card. You're like, hey, I'm going to just swipe $3,600. If you look at your interest rate on that, how much you're paying on $3,600, by the time you pay it off, that trip could cost you as much as a brand new car. And you might say, no, that's ridiculous. Take your interest rate, 29%, anywhere from 21 to 29% over time. Some people might have a lower one here, but the reality is it's a high interest rate. You want to get rid of debt as much as possible and have a zero balance month to month.
Absolutely. And, as Jim is saying, when you're looking at all these expenses, finding ways to save or reduce those lines. So I like to think of them as like lanes on the highway. So we know we have about this much for groceries. We have about this much for entertainment. We have about this much for eating out. And there are definitely ways that you can cut those. So when we were first on a budget, this is again 20 years ago, we never ate out, never, because we were in go mode for paying down our debt. I mean, we had a line in our budget where, I don't know the exact number, but say we were paying $300-400 a month just to our debt, so we could get to that point. Well, what that translates to is going out to eat every week. We just didn't. We prioritized spending down the debt. So now we're at the place where we can go out to eat, but we still need to keep it in that lane, because what can happen is, a couple trips to McDonald's or Starbucks or Chipotle, whatever is your favorite flavor, can add up easily to $300-400-500 a month. And so if you are in debt and you want to find a way to get out of it, this is where paying attention helps. So finding ways that you can reduce those lanes, not saying never go out to eat, but if you go and look at your budget and you're like, wow, we spent $600 last month on going out to eat, just reduce it in half. I mean, $300 is still a couple times a month you get to go out, and what you will find is you actually enjoy it more. Like our kids talk about sometimes like, wow, yeah, remember that one time we went to the restaurant, because we never took them to restaurants when they were little. I mean, even now, a lot of times our eating out is we just order pizza because it's economical. I mean, we have a big family. We have lots of mouths to feed. So for us to go sit down at a restaurant it's a chunk of money. So taking those categories and seeing how you can reduce it. A couple ways to do this. Food is a big one. And Jim talked about reducing subscriptions, but food is something that we utilize every single day. And so when you have your budget of how much you're spending on groceries, again, pay attention to what you're starting at, and then see how you can reduce it a little bit. It doesn't have to be a ton. It doesn't have to be in half. That might not be realistic, but there are certain things that you're spending at the grocery store that are probably not necessary. This is where it comes into what do we actually need? What do we want? What are these things that can become treats that we don't have to have in the house every day? And a couple things that we've reduced in general are sodas, candy, desserts, things like that, that really, we shouldn't really be eating these things anyway. And we're spending tons of money. If you look at what a 12 pack of soda costs now at the grocery store, it's absolutely ridiculous what we're spending. Even if we're buying it in bulk at Sam's Club, it could be $20 for a case of soda. Well, our teenagers can go through that in 1 week. So then that's $80 a month, right? That's how much thousands of dollars in a year that we're drinking. So paying attention to see how you can save is just reducing those lanes little by little. Okay. So that's going to come up with some savings. Also, how can you actually save money? So using coupons, looking at deals, when buying groceries when they're on sale. One of the biggest ways you can save on your food is by planning out your menu. So it's not Tuesday night, you're like, oh, what are we going to have? Oh, I just don't really feel like it. Let's just order pizza, right? Planning your week ahead with, again, a lot of times the healthiest foods are less expensive than the convenience of eating out or the convenience of prepackaged meals. And if you budget for it and you're like, hey, we use HelloFresh, we like to use this subscription service for our food. If you put it in the budget and that works for you, go for it, right? Because again, you're making that choice. So using coupons, really looking at what you're spending in each lane, planning ahead. So if you know every summer your kids are going to need sunscreen, okay, and you see that's on sale in January, stock up, right? Things that you know you're going to use, planning ahead for Christmas. One of the things that Jim and I do with our budget is those big items that he talked about, saving for a vacation, also saving for holidays. I mean, we will give each of our kids a certain amount for each birthday. Then we have Christmas, we have, Easter, we have Thanksgiving dinner. All those holidays add up. And what happens is sometimes when you don't plan, you get to Thanksgiving, you're like, oh my gosh, our groceries are so high because we had to buy the turkey, we had to buy this. Planning ahead for your holidays by saving, say, $200 a month even, that's going to go into this line, this budget, this little pot, this lane for your holidays. So when it comes to Christmas time, all of a sudden you have a couple $1,000s that you don't have to stress about buying gifts with because you have it prepared. So planning ahead, utilizing savings as much as you can, reducing those lanes are all going to be ways that you're going to maximize your budget. It's not just having a budget to have one. It's how can we maximize it to then, again, live the life that we want.
So when we were paying off our budget or paying off our debt, I remember I got a chance to deploy. And when I was deployed, we made a little extra money. So it helped us to accelerate the debt payments. But then we came back and had to go to a training. And while I was at training, we found out that my house had sunk. So the earth had moved under it. And I think it was 26 inches of gap. Was that right? Under or more underneath the basement. So we had like a bi-level, like dual house, a basement and top level. And so it was such a huge gap that you could see like the stairwell separating, like all kinds of things. And it kind of happened quickly. And it was a comedy of errors that got us to that point, but it was bad. And it cost a ton of money. It's not covered by homeowners insurance. Let everybody know that. So while I'm in training, we went from like, oh my gosh, we're making so much progress to a new $5,000 bill a day for like 2 weeks. And I was like, like just have it literally like almost panic attacks in my room at night, seeing these bills come in that are just surreal to just flatten your floor. It's not like you're getting like an upgrade to your home. You're just making sure that it's a really flat, like floor.
Structurally safe.
Yeah, which is great. It's safe home, totally good, totally worth it. But still you're like, okay. So that's what's considered an emergency. And when you start budgeting, at some point, you're going to have an emergency. That could be an emergency room run, literally with a child. That could be, like for us, we had the NICU with Sage. These are things that come up that are legitimate family emergencies of some kind. Someone gets in a car wreck, all those things. Now, you might say, well, that's pretty negative, Jim. Well, I'm confident that at some point in your life, you're going to have one of these scenarios. So creating an emergency fund is putting cash away intentionally of about 3 to 6 months of expenses so that when the emergency happens, it's not as stressful as you'd think. Now you might say like, that's not necessary. I'm just going to focus on my budget. It is the most critical part of this plan. You need to put money away for those unforeseen challenges and say nothing about it. It doesn't exist. It's not your Disney fund. It's not the go out to dinner and have a nice weekend fund. It's the no kidding, like when it hits the fan, this needs to be leveraged, because all of a sudden when you have a disaster, or let's say a tire blows, you need to replace all your tires. For some people, that can turn into an emergency. And frankly, that could be easily like $1,200, right? $1,000. So we have to look for ways to do it. So how do you deal with it? Start immediately. As you look at, we talked about looking at what you're paying, what you're spending on now. Immediately start putting money into this emergency fund. Again, the target, at least to start with, is let's say $1,000, but you want to get that to 3 to 6 months, ideally towards 6 months of income, because nowadays when there's a problem, like it's a huge problem. You go to the emergency room, it could be even with insurance, you're talking like $400 to $500, etc. Okay, so the next thing is to man it to avoid any pitfalls. What do I mean? If you turn on the news or any television channel, there's an advertisement for like debt consolidation services. I'm just going to say you're going to want to avoid those. A pitfall of the situation is to find someone that you can pay to just deal with this. The issue of like debt and having financial resilience as a person is psychological. All this is psychological. You don't have a spending problem, you have a psychology problem, just like we did. When you deal with the psychology behind it, it can help solve the debt issue. But most of the time, people are spending or buying things for underlying psychological reasons. So hiring someone to deal with your debt isn't solving the problem, it's moving the problem somewhere else. And so it would be like saying like, hey, I'm an alcoholic. I'm going to stop drinking whiskey. So I'm just going to have beer. Okay, well, that's great, I guess. But like, what are you doing about the underlying problem? Well, no, I'm going to have beer. I'm going to hide the whiskey and give it away. Like, I know that sounds like it's not a great parallel, and maybe it isn't. But the thing about it is you're not dealing with the underlying addiction issue. And I'm not saying spending is an addiction, although it can be. So one of the things to just do is to avoid anything like that. You want to try to handle this by yourself. Now, I'm not saying going to talk to a professional who can advise you on it, but we don't want to use a service that you're going to pay that says I'm going to solve all your problems, because a lot of those are just there to manipulate the poor. So just note, if you're ever in that spot, please avoid it.
And so one of the things that Jim didn't tell you is the end of that story. So our house was sinking. We had an emergency fund, which was initially $1,000. Like, that's what we learned. So we have, $1,000 emergency fund. That's great if you blow a tire, but when your house is sinking and you owe $20,000 to fix it, that's not going to cut it. So what we did was we sold the car. And people will be like, what? You sold a car? Yeah, we sold a car. We went from 2 cars to 1 car. And for how long was it, Jim?
About a year.
About a year. Yeah. Jim biked or rode to work. Now, we had the luxury.
Or ran, yeah.
We had the luxury that we lived about 10 miles from his job, which is not terribly far. However, when it's snowing and you live in Colorado and you're biking and running to work every day, I mean, people looked at him like he had 3 heads. But you know what we did? We paid off that debt. And so when we're talking about getting intensely focused on this is not just like we kind of want to save. It's like when people say, I kind of want to get healthy. That doesn't mean anything. I want you to be so focused on getting ahead financially, not just getting ahead, but getting to baseline. Because and this is going to go into what I'm going to talk about next, what this is going to do is going to change your family. It's going to change what you're able to do for your children. It's going to change the stress level that your kids are going to have when you're 80 and they're having to really step up, and you're either going to be debt free with a home full of equity, or you're going to be, 80 and ill with $90,000 in credit card debt. That's the reality of the 2 tracks that we're on. So we don't say any of this to scare or to shame, but to say this is important. It's important now, but it's also important to your future. And so that's one of the things I want to talk about lastly, is having an open communication with your children about money, right? A lot of times kids will now take financial responsibility classes. There's another word for it that I can't think of right now, but they'll learn how to make a budget. My teenagers, they had to look up what job they wanted potentially in the future, what that job made, how much rent costs in Denver, how much they're expensive, and they had to really do the math, which I think is brilliant. However, when you can model healthy spending and healthy budgeting, and also the benefits of budgeting, like, we just put a gym in our basement. That's not a small expense, but our kids know we don't take expensive vacations because fitness is our priority. So we probably spent about 3 vacations worth in our basement, but we'll have it for the rest of our life. So modeling the choices that you're making and how to prioritize money, it's a great tool for them as they get older and they spend money, but also explaining to them why, how come, I remember one year Samantha's like, well, somebody got AirPods in their Easter basket. I'm like, well, good for them. You got a chocolate bunny and, a new swimsuit. So having conversations, not about the Easter bunny or who is filling those baskets, but more so why we do what we do. And they know, like, one of the reasons we didn't eat out so much, one of the reasons we didn't take expensive vacations, because we were getting ahead financially. And I think as they got older, now they appreciate we do live in a beautiful home. We do have cars that are paid off. We don't have financial stress like a lot of families do because of the work that we've put into it. And this is not, again, like, oh, we're so great. This is just like, learn from us that, sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's hard to say, no, we can't do that. No, we don't have money for that. And not to just put stress on them, but to communicate them. It's not that we don't have money. We're just using our money for different things, and teaching them and having that open communication, I think, helps them relax too, because they know they're safe. Their house is safe. They're not going to not have food on the dinner table because of the choices that we're making. So one, having communication about why you're spending the way you do, also teaching them how to budget their money. Now our kids all have debit cards, and so we're teaching them how to spend. So you're not just modeling for them, you're teaching them the tools, and that will also help them be financially responsible. So they're not going to come to you at, age 30 with $100,000 in debt because they can't pay their car payment. So again, this is changing your day-to-day activity to really set up your future and make, a strong financial plan for you and your whole family.
So again, if nothing else, take away from this podcast, go and look at what you're actually spending, and not just the credit card reports, but like spend some time, type it out. You deserve better than what you've got. Like, write it out, figure out a budget, create an emergency plan, get your priorities on paper, and you can live a life like no one else. It's not easy to get there, but I will tell you, you can't out earn this issue. And I want to end with 2 really good stories. So there were 2 individuals I knew who were in the Air Force who were tech sergeants. they aren't making very much. I'm going to say maybe at that point $60,000 a year. Both of them were worth well over $1 million in cash. Now you might say, well, wait a minute, how did they get that much money? Well, both of them set out at the beginning of their career to live off a very small percentage of their income and invest it. And what they found was that by investing it and putting that money away, it has a snowball effect that over that about probably 15 years that they had that much, like, no kidding, invested cash. It's incredible. And some of them were like, they're still really cheap, like as far as the way that they spend money. But now they're at a place where they can live their lives that they want. They're going to be retired, no debt, with just an incredible amount of cash. And that's just from being intentional. Now, they aren't making anywhere near what many people are making, but they were able to do that. You can too. It might take you some time to dig out, but once you're dug out, you can live an amazing life. So I want to thank you for listening today. If you have any questions on this or anything else, we both kind of, we did the Dave Ramsey program facilitation for a very long time. So if you have questions, please throw it in and we'll do our best to answer it. Otherwise, thanks for listening.
Awesome. And if you ever want to talk about a specific topic or you have any questions, you can always find us on Instagram at the Just Ask Podcast.